On July 21, 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first person to step on the moon under NASA's Apollo 11 mission, shortly after Buzz Aldrin also stepped on the moon. This historic moment was seen by more than 650 million people worldwide. The film was done in a studio. There are many questions that are often raised about the moon landing, such as why there are no stars in the photos taken on the moon, and how this flag is waving when there is no air on the moon. Then what is the truth of all this? Let's try to know the truth of all this. The war between the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union began, in which both countries wanted to overtake each other in every respect, one of which was space, which led to a space race between the two countries. In the year 1957, the Soviet became the first country to reach space by launching an artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, a month later. On November 3rd, the Soviet Sputnik 2. On January 31st, 1958, the United States launched its first space mission, Explore 1, which was equipped with experimental equipment that discovered the Van Allen belt. On April 1961, the Soviet launches the Vostok 1 spacecraft, making Yuri Gagarin of the Soviet Union the first person to go to space. This gives a major blow to America and leaves behind the Soviets in this space race, due to which on May 25, 1961, U.S. President John F. Kennedy announced that the U.S. would send humans to the moon by the end of this decade and send them to the moon. It will also bring us back to the safe Earth. It seems impossible for people to think at that time. Then the entire space agency starts achieving this one objective. NASA conducts several unmanned test missions between 1963 and 1967, in which many aspects of spacecraft and launch vehicles are tested, and the first manned mission, Apollo 1, is planned for February 1967. But during ground rehearsals, all 3 astronauts died due to a fire in its cabin.
But even after this, NASA does not give up, and in December 1968, NASA seems to have a major breakthrough when their Apollo 8 becomes the world's first spacecraft in which astronauts orbited the moon and successfully returned to Earth. The Apollo 11 mission is launched to send Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins to the moon. 4 days later, on July 20th, Apollo 11's Lunar Module Eagle successfully lands on the moon, and about 6 hours after landing, Neil Armstrong takes his first step on the moon at around 2:56 p.m. on July 21st. Now, the President of the United States had promised that America would land humans on the moon before the end of this decade. NASA did it. But from here the mission was surrounded by many controversies. People had to say that America had made a fake moon landing to win the space race, and NASA had sent astronauts only to the orbit of the Earth and moon landing. There are many other conspiracy theories that were made about the moon landing, such as how the flag that astronauts put on the moon is waving because there is no air on the moon. So this is the reason that NASA had designed a special flag to take to the moon, in which a horizontal rod was attached on top of the flag, which kept the flag upright, and the astronauts could not fully extend this horizontal rod, due to which there were many waves on the flag, due to which the flag looked like this. It was as if you were waving. Another theory that is raised that why are no stars visible in the photos taken on the moon? The reason is that the moon landing took place during the daytime, when the sun on the moon, the lights were falling on, and the space suits that the astronauts were wearing they were also reflecting light a lot, as well as at the time of moon landing. The cameras that were there were not so advanced to capture the stars. Now look at this photo. This is a photo of Buzz Aldrin by Neil Armstrong. In this, Neil Armstrong's reflection is visible in Aldrin's helmet visor. This photo raises the question, if Neil Armstrong wasn't holding a camera, who was taking this photo? Actually, Neil Armstrong wasn't using a handheld camera, but rather a camera mounted on the front of his spacesuit, which he controlled from there. Another question raised is about objects in moon photos visible despite shadows. If the sun is the only light source on the moon, this shouldn't happen, leading some to argue NASA used studio lights for clear photos. But in reality, the sun wasn't the only light source on the moon. The moon's surface also reflected sunlight, and when this reflected light fell on objects, they became visible even in shadowed areas. Another question that is raised is that if Neil Armstrong was the first person to step on the moon, then who took those photos when he was descending from the lunar module? The answer is also very simple, that there are multiple cameras in the lunar module. All these conspiracy theories were created about moon landing, which were given reasonable explanations. Debunked. And if the moon landing was a hoax done by the US, if it had been attempted, the rival Soviet of America would never have accepted it. But the Great Soviet, in many articles in the 3rd edition of the encyclopedia, Moon landing has been described as a fact. It states that the moon landing was the third historical event of the space age. Apollo during the program, 6 crewed missions were sent to the moon from 1960 to 1970 and a total of 12 astronauts landed on the moon. But in December 1972, the Apollo 17 mission was launched. No human has ever been sent to the moon, including Eugene Cernan was the last astronaut to step on the moon. Although NASA is planning to return to the moon through its Artemis program. The first woman and the first person of color will land on the moon. What about this whole issue? The idea is to tell in the comment section, and if you have something new from this video. If you get to learn, then like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.